Hey guys, welcome back to the Ignite SAT Mastery course. Today we'll be covering Lesson 3 of Module 3, Grammar Rules. Now, as a quick refresher, let's look at some of these questions that test grammar rules. Now, we have two indicators of a grammar rules question. Now, one of them is very similar phrases and changing, and another one is the tense of those phrases changing. And these both test grammar, both in the context of those phrases and the entire sentences. Now, let's look at some important rules that'll help us answer these questions. The first one is concision and redundancy. Now, a big thing to note on the SAT is that it doesn't necessarily ask for the correct answer, it asks for the best answer. And in this case, the SAT will always need the more concise answer in a given question. For example, let's look at this on the right. Thinking in a manner more general and the word generally mean the exact same thing. So the SAT would test the question in the sense that generally would be the correct answer. Next, we have idioms and expressions, and this has to do with the appropriateness of certain phrases. For examples, a bunch of guys doing experiments or a team of researchers in the context of synthesizing lithium-ion batteries have a big difference, and a team of researchers are more appropriate to the specific scientific sentence. Now, let's look at conjunctions and adverbs, or verbs and adjectives that combine two different clauses together. Foreshadowing, a literary technique when an author hints at what will happen later, or foreshadowing, a literary technique whereby an author hints at what will happen later. And both of these verbs will change the meaning of these sentences, and this is important, especially when considering the content. And finally, we have subject versus object thinking. And this has to do with the specific words underlining the subject versus object orientation. Now, the words like who and whom, which are commonly used on the SAT, where who is being referred to by the subject, object is being referred to by the whom. Now, let's try answering one of these questions. We have this phrase and question 8. And the first thing we're going to look at is the actual phrase itself and the answer choices. Now, it contains, containing, contains, and will contain are all variations of the same phrase. And the way we gauge the correctness of the answer is by looking at the sentence in total. So, nutritionists consider Greek yogurt to be a healthy food. It is an excellent source of calcium and protein, serves to be a digestive aid, and it contains few calories in its unsweetened, low, and non-fat forms. Look how I emphasize those specific words. That is because the use of an and serves are an active way of using parallel lists. And in this case, it is already referring to the Greek yogurt. So having the word it before contains is just being redundant in this case. By that same notion, serves is being active in the present tense, so contains is a proper word in this context. This only leaves us with one answer, just contains by itself, and this indeed would be correct. Now, how about you guys try answering one of these questions? Now that you've had an attempt at it, let's go over. Now, again, we're going to use the same strategy at looking at these specific phrases. In this case, can pollute waterways with the possession, could have polluted waterways, and has polluted waterways with the possession, all test different grammar rules. And this has to do with the tense, the nouns being used, and mostly with the phrases being said. Now, let's look at this sentence in the context of the phrases. If it is improperly introduced into the environment, acid way runoff can pollute waterways, depleting the oxygen content of streams and rivers as it decomposes. Now, I highlighted it is to show the singular noun form of what is being looked at. So we can easily say that can pollute is a proper use. And this also does go with the context. This is talking about the future, and the can, the possibility, whereas could and has both refer to the past. Now, let's look at the possession. Now, streams and rivers is not possessive of the word waterways. Waterways is just a general noun, so we can dial down and cross out that question. And this really leaves us with one option: no change. Now, let's look at some tips when answering these questions. The first one is checking. You need to check the changes in the questions and the answer choices, whether it's the tense or the prepositions being used or the subject or object agreement. This will give you the whole, outline of the answer being looked at. The next is underlining or mentally underlining. Just looking at that phrase and having that phrase boxed out or targeted within the context of that sentence will help tremendously. The next step, of course, is context. You need to know what's being said. Is it a list? Is it a parallel phrase? Is it two independent clauses? Is it two dependent clauses? You need to know how these sentences are separated. And finally, you're going to choose the answer that most aligns with what you have. In most cases on this writing section, whatever you think in your head, however you say the sentence out loud, is usually going to sound comfortable to you based on one of those phrases. For example, not all phrases sound right when we say them in our head, so usually that's a good indicator that certain questions are wrong. Now, next time, we're going to be looking at logical transitions and how to approach them on the writing section of the SAT.